Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome. And thank you for joining us on a fairly steamy, hot day in Bradford. This is undoubtedly going to be one of the most urgent and pressing conversations, I think, of the entire festival. The conflict between Israel and Palestine has long been one of the most deeply entrenched and contested issues of our lifetime and in global affairs. In recent months, the headlines have been dominated not only because of the sheer scale of the suffering, but also because it forces all of us to confront our views on justice, power, human rights, and really the rule of international law and where we go with that and how we respect it. The conversation isn't just rooted in politics and diplomacy just as an abstract idea. It is about people, lives that have been uprooted, futures that have been annihilated, and communities that are facing unimaginable loss. But it's also about understanding the systems and the decisions and the global dynamics that underpin the decisions that have allowed that to happen. And crucially, what possibilities remain for us in terms of justice, dignity, and peace for all. The aim this afternoon is to go beyond those headlines, to unpack the facts on the ground and the shifts in global and regional dynamics. Again, talking about the role of law and diplomacy and power. And for us to do that, I've got two extremely esteemed panelists. I feel a little bit of shyness sitting here introducing them. Daniel Levy, a political analyst, former Israeli negotiator and president of the US Middle East Project, has spent decades deeply vested and involved in the diplomatic and political processes surrounding this conflict. Wadda Ghanfar, former Director General of Al Jazeera and president of Al Sharq Forum, a leading Palestinian public intellectual and a leading light in shaping these conversations about the future of the Arab world and quite possibly the architect of New Arabia as we go forward. Together, and that's his line, and honestly, I'm taking it and I'm going to use it to introduce him going forward. Just a brief comment on how the session's going to go. I'm going to start out with just a couple of moderated questions and leave significant time for audience participation and audience questions. We've got prepared questions here, but really we do encourage questions, short, concise, respectful questions, while we welcome commentary, the questions are what we want to engage with, to engage the panelists. So just to get us started and to look at the current situation and very specifically what has changed. Daniel, if I could start with you, how would you describe the current situation, the current reality on the ground in terms of what's happening in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, particularly since the recent escalation? What has shifted? If you could give us your perspective on that.
Thank you very much, Nabila, and the festival for having us here. Can people hear me okay? Okay, great. I imagine it's apparent to everyone, but I think it's important when talking about this to just state up front that history, this conflict, did not begin on October 7th. So for decades, up to and including October 6th, life was not normal for Palestinians living under occupation and apartheid. Violations of international law were being committed by Israel on a daily basis. All avenues to redress that situation were closed to Palestinians. You can't understand October 7th or anything subsequently without that, which is not to excuse. October 7th is a violation of international law. That's why the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants also for some of the leadership, no longer among the living, who were involved in that. After that, Israel makes its intentions very clear. Day one, The statement coming from the Israeli leadership is we will cut all food, fuel, water, electricity to the entire population of Gaza. Since then, that is the playbook that has been followed, and we have seen a series of war crimes and other violations of international law being committed, which is why there is a case of violations of the Genocide Convention under consideration at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and that is why that court already in January of 2024 gave a provisional ruling on urgent measures that Israel would need to undertake not to place itself further in the jeopardy of being in violation of the Genocide Convention. That ruling was totally ignored. And I think a few things have happened. And for me, a central thing was Israel has gotten very used to, over those decades, being able to act with impunity, and it may be a theme we return to, with regard to the Palestinians. And under these circumstances, it took impunity for another test drive. What if we say these things? What if we start doing these things? Destruction of everything, schools, hospitals, prevention of anything going in. Let's openly talk about ethnic cleansing. How will I don't want to say the world, but how will those who enable us, our Western backers, our American backers, those who arm us, how will they respond? And the initial feel, if you had not only the government of the time, take the UK as an example, but the opposition leaders at the time, saying, this isn't a violation of international law. I think people may know who I'm talking about, who himself has a legal background, who went on telly early on and said this. And they kept driving that. They took also the time to test how is our own society going to respond, Israeli society. And Israeli Jewish society was primed for this moment. The level of dehumanization of Palestinians, the extent to which people had been mobilized around the idea that somehow the Palestinians were some kind of modern manifestation of the phantasmagoria of Jewish past, and how pliant would the neighborhood be? How pliant would regional states be? So and now we are in a place where there's really very little doubt. Most experts are now coalesced around the legal definition that this constitutes a genocide. That is true also of most of the most respected, also Jewish Holocaust historians, for instance. And so, at the same time, let's also acknowledge that this isn't only Gaza. We're also seeing an unprecedented level of destruction in the occupied West Bank. I think it's about 50,000 Palestinians have been displaced from refugee camps. There's a level of destruction of infrastructure. And I think Israel is simply testing how far it can go. And it is presenting things through a zero-sum lens. That's not to say there's no division in Israeli society. The division is not around primarily, there are dissenting voices, the division is not around how Palestinians are treated, but what Israel's priorities should be, including the return of the Israelis being held in Gaza. Reservists are not showing up for reserve duty because they don't think this is going anywhere good. So Israel remains a polarized society, just not necessarily around the things that one might expect. Also inside Israel, 20% of the population are Palestinian citizens of Israel. They face a whole new level of of intimidation, oversight, arrests on the most spurious of grounds. And we're still in this dynamic. We're still in this dynamic of what can we get away with, where Israel, of course, does not operate in a vacuum. It operates in a regional context. Obviously, we've just been through what we've been through in Iran. We might talk about that. It operates in a geopolitical context. It operates in the context of what those who guarantee Israel's well-being are willing to do for it. And let me pause there.
Yeah. So to summarize that, basically, Israel has taken its bully tactic out for a ride to see how far it can go towards a totalitarian state.
Well, it's a state. It's very zero-sum. We're in. Don't underestimate. Take them seriously, just like one should have taken them seriously for decades.
Yep.
One should have taken them seriously in what they said they were about to do. Take very seriously the idea of a second Nakba, the removal of Palestinians. It's done. Regions swing behind us. We're the strong guys. We are the regional hegemon. And now you see all kinds of visions being put forward by some in the Israeli political camp who are saying October 7th was bad, but we are now in the messianic best of times where we can achieve everything. So it's not just bullying or totalitarianism, it's much deeper.
It's much deeper than that. So Wada, if we could switch to the Palestinian experience, and where are we now politically, socially, and in daily life? Is this a fundamental turning point, and is there any hope?
Thank you very much. So in 1994, I landed in South Africa to join the celebration of Mr. Nelson Mandela becoming the first president of free South Africa, free from a nuclear apartheid state, which was supported by most Western governments and defended by a lot of political elite, regardless of all the crimes they committed against the blacks, the Africans in South Africa. Now, the twin sister of the apartheid state of South Africa is right now completing the circle or the cycle that South Africa could not. South Africa did not reach the genocide. A colonial settler entity eventually found itself forced, because of many reasons, to give up the apartheid for the sake of a new South Africa. But Israel continued to be the nuclear apartheid state that moved from the apartheid into ethnic cleansing, into genocide, to complete the total cycle with Western centers of power mostly supporting that genocide. Not only complicit, they are partners in this genocide. So, where do we stand today? We are in the middle of the genocide. The first ever genocide in history, streamlined directly to us on our screens, while we are watching every day the burning and the killing of kids, women, men, and destruction of people who have been kept hungry, and babies who are dying because they cannot find the milk. So this is where we are at this moment in time. Is this the end of Palestine or the Palestinians? Of course not. This land has survived thousands of years and hundreds of invaders, and we continue to exist, and we will continue to exist. Because the issue is, think about it, every invader came to our region, thought that he is going to establish something new, the eternal. And I was quoting the first king of the so-called eternal kingdom of Jerusalem, Baldwin I, in the year 1100, when he declared himself the first king of a dynasty that will rule that land forever. They could not survive the century. Forget about the forever part of it. Then we had many conquerors who thought that they are going to establish a new Middle East, or end a civilization and civilize the people. Napoleon Bonaparte, when he came to France, he wanted also to civilize the Egyptians and to give them the Enlightenment. He was kicked out after 3 years. This land will never accept the aliens who are coming with force, hubris, arrogance, and fight against every meaning of decency and international concept of morality to civilize us and to establish a new Middle East in our land. This is the land of prophets, philosophers, civilizations, thousands of years of history. Ben Smotrich today, he published an article defining the new Middle East based on the most powerful entity ever created in the region called Israel, where it is going to be the center connecting the 3 continents, you know? Exactly, this is what they think, you know, but this is not going. The problem is, it is a test actually for the humanity. This is not the end of Palestine or Palestinians. This is the end of every establishment or political party or intellectual or journalist or ordinary person who do keep silent or who do support this genocide. That is the real end. It is not the end of the land of Palestine or the Palestinians. Even if most Palestinians are killed in this, eventually we will continue to have people in that region and in the world doing what they have done to South Africa, because South Africa was not only, the battle against apartheid was not fought in South Africa. It was fought in the streets of London and Paris and everywhere in the capital of the world, because a lot of people like yourselves stood for justice and they supported the people of South Africa until they liberated their land. This is what's going to happen. We are witnessing, regardless of the blood and the death of our people in Gaza and in West Bank, we are now witnessing as a resurrection of a new spirit in the world. A new spirit which is highly needed after the total decay of the Western establishment and political institutions. A new beginning for every one of us, for our children, not only for Palestine, for every one of us. This is necessary to have it now. And Gaza is giving us that opportunity to discover how deep, how corrupt this vicious cycle has led us. And this is where, in my opinion, we should start. We are not weak, we are not defeated, but we will continue the struggle and you will continue with us.
So essentially, we are experiencing the ultimate test case for humanity and where we go with humanity. What role then, in terms of regional actors, you've both touched on it ever so briefly, but let's talk a little about what's happened in Iran. Let's talk about Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, the Gulf states, and their response. And are there going to be new alliances built, or are they just going to sit back and watch this decay?
As you have corrupt institutions and politicians and governments, we do have also the most corrupt political institutions in the world, simply because it was made to be corrupt. It was made to be weak. From Sykes-Picot until today, the state that was established in the Middle East, the so-called state, which I don't know, I mean, they call it state, nation state, but of course it is not nation anyway. These states were designed to be weak. And the leaders of these states were actually designed to be puppets for the Western hegemonic powers. And the Americans, of course, before that, the British. This is exactly what we do. So when you tell me, and I'm very sorry to report back to you, that most countries in our region are either silent or complicit, or at least they are banning their people from protesting. And this, in my opinion, is going to be a very dangerous game that they are playing, because they might think that silence means consent. But in this region, silence never meant consent. Silence meant that people are accumulating the anger and the frustration, and one day that will explode in the face of all these, tyrants in our region. Now, the war in Iran, which you have brought up. The war in Iran, of course, the Israelis, after the war in Iran, felt the euphoria of success and victory, and now they are going to redefine the Middle East. Okay, fine. But think about it. Did they really succeed in doing that? Because even from a very objective point of view, Iran has not been defeated in a way that everyone else, they would like it to appear. So, the nuclear establishment, the nuclear, project has not been demolished, in my opinion. We still have to know to what extent, what kind of damage has happened. B, the strategy of Iran for the last few decades, or 2-3 decades, was deterrence. I think now they convinced Iran to move into another strategy. So if Iran did not really think of having a nuclear weapon, not only Iran will think of having a nuclear weapon, every actor would like to fill the vacuum in the region will start thinking of having a nuclear weapon, as long as Israel has it. Because this war has proven that the way that Israel conducted the war in Iran, it did that because in the back mind of every general in Israel, I have the utmost weapon. So whatever is going to happen to me, I am capable of annihilating the enemy. Therefore, they are empowered with this massive, tyranny that they could hit everyone. Now, everyone is noticing that. Turkey is noticing that. Pakistan is noticing that. All the Arab neighbors, although the leaders are not capable of doing much, but they are also noticing that. So there is a new dynamic emerging in that region. So Israel is actually doing a very dangerous game by that kind of reach out. The third point, now, if the Iranians reach a deal, which they might with time, that does not mean, not only Iran, if all the region do sign the so-called Abrahamic Accords, okay, let us say so, because there could be now Mr. Trump bring them and they are forced to come to a magnificent celebration, shaking hands with Netanyahu, declaring him the hero for the new peaceful Middle East. Fine. That we have learned during the last 30, 40 years, that is always doomed to fail. You know how many new Middle East I witnessed in my life? You know how many grand proposals, magnificent celebrations, lovely conferences, fantastic declarations we have seen? What we ended with a genocide, isn't it? Where all the other peace proposals and the projects and conferences that happened, all of them were based on wrong foundations. As long as the Palestinians do not have justice, every structure, every architecture in this region will fail, and Israel will more and more be endangered by the wrath of the people and the world.
So Daniel, if I could come to you, you earlier mentioned that Israel is prepared to play the zero-sum game. And Wadha has just mentioned about how Israel is prepared to go to that endpoint, and the regional influences that they've acted according to their puppet masters. So let's move a little towards the positioning of the West, particularly the United States, the United Kingdom, the EU. What's their position going to be, and what is their influence going to remain? And if you could perhaps also touch on Russia and China, because they're just sitting back right now. So where are we with those actors?
So I think it's quite clear that we couldn't be where we are now if the US in particular had not continued to provide the weaponry, the political cover, the diplomatic cover, the economic support. If you want to look at silver linings, then one thing about this president is when he says something and it happens to be accurate, it is also shorn of the usual diplomatic speak that goes around it. So he says, America saved Israel. I think on last night's post, he said, we spend an awful lot of money. We give them so much. We spend our money on... America would be isolated in that respect if the UK, others in Europe, Western allies didn't align with that. But to understand the significance and limitations of that, I would put it in a broader context. And it's the context that Wada offered us. And it's why my analysis of this is that Israel is in deep overreach territory. It's hubris. And where is it is going with this is far more likely to end badly also for Jewish Israelis. That's, I think, one of the, and by the way, what it is trying to bring Jewish communities around the world to support, which is one of the reasons, you'll have me saying what I'm saying, but many of us are not going to have this done in our name because of basic human decency and what we understand to be the ethic and the tradition we were born into, but also because we think it's a bloody bad idea for our own well-being. And so why I would argue that this is so dangerous is that Israel seems to not be aware of the history that Wada and many of us are aware of. That these schematics come and go. If you make yourself indigestible, unabsorbable by the region that you live in, this is not going to end well for you. And if Israel is thinking in zero-sum terms, then the conversation that I more often than not find myself having with Israeli Jewish friends who are not totally aligned is, you know, when you go zero-sum and it's them or us, it might not be the them that end up on the losing side in this region. So, look, what is quite clear is that as a social construct, Israel's threshold of pain is in a different place to Palestinians and others around it. Now, you know, that's sad, right? I wish Palestinians didn't have to go through this and have this resilience, or other people, but that's just a truism. 11 odd days of Iranian missiles didn't collapse the country, but it did something to the Israeli psychology. I'm not just talking that they were running out of interceptor missiles and things like that. This isn't a country with a resistance economy. It's a country very prone to being impacted by how it's perceived in the world. So number one, that's inside of Israel. Number two, this project that Wada referred to, this idea that you can have no capacity to offer the people of the region, not just a few leaders who maybe you won over with some great cyber spyware or other things. If you have nothing that makes sense on their terms, that you can offer the tens and hundreds of millions of people who you live in the vicinity of, and yet you try to be a hegemon, that's a recipe for failure, not for success. To be a hegemon, you have to have also some forbearance, some alliance capacity, some understanding of who you are dealing with. And Israel offers none of that. And the third thing that I put into the mix, which I think helps illuminate where one is with the West, is we are in a shifting geopolitical reality, okay? We are not in a unipolar world. Some of that is, I mean, let's take the example, and I think you may have referenced it in passing, Wada. Let's take the example from just the last few months. Pakistan relied quite heavily on Chinese military supplied equipment just now in that tit for tat with India. Played out really okay for them. the region is looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute, if we use the American kit and they can kind of have the off switch because it's their ally who we need to defend ourselves against, or we need to try to deter, then what lesson do we learn from that? So this is a shifting geopolitical reality where, I mean, you'll all be familiar with, you know, who's selling the most electric vehicles, who has the most sophisticated electric vehicles, who's now apparently, even when they were banned from buying certain Western chip technology, developed apparently a very competitive AI software, etc. But we are also in, and I'll close with this, a different era in the West. Some of those countries we used to talk about as emerging global South powers, they're emerged, they're here. They were lectured to by our Western leaders after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And they were told, why aren't you with us? We all have an interest in keeping this international institutional architecture and legal set of rules together. They're to protect all of us. It doesn't end in Ukraine. And they said, right. You know this is how you normally act. Okay. And then along comes Gaza. Okay, where are you on this now? I thought these were designed to protect all of us. Sorry? Oh, you're vetoing that at the UN Security Council. Oh, you're sanctioning the International Criminal Court. And it coincides with a moment where we ourselves are, I think, in a moment of particular contestation as to what we want. Our leaders aren't listening to us. You know, what happened at Glastonbury yesterday, at one level, okay, it's a music festival, fine. I'm talking about the pro-Palestinian stuff at Glastonbury, which if you're not familiar with it, you will be soon enough, probably. But that represents a shift in the cultural zeitgeist. And Israel, I'm not saying it ends tomorrow, I wish I could, but Israel is very out of step with that. That is extremely dangerous for them.
Wow. A tough place to be in. And I'm not sure where the diplomatic off-ramp is going to be, and perhaps we'll end with that. However, before we get to that, I really do want to open it up to the audience, and then we'll end with that question right at the end as to what a diplomatic off-ramp could potentially be. Questions in the audience? There's, I think, we'll take this one right up here, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Daniel, you were saying about Israel pushing its luck, pushing the envelope, see how far it could go. What kind of messages could a country like the UK actually send that would get heard by the Israeli government and by the majority of the Israeli people?
Yeah.
So the answer isn't as simple as I'd like it to be. First of all, because they have gotten so used to hearing words that words will not be enough. Secondly, the society is sufficiently mobilized around the idea that when they do nice things, they're our friends. When they do things we don't like, they're anti-Semites. That things are relatively easily dismissed. But, and the but is really important, I would argue that what has been the handmaiden to the capacity of this leadership to take Israeli society in this direction has been that when people who should have known better inside Israel gave up on the idea, because there's no political opposition worthy of the name inside the Zionist political camp in Israel. And when the folks who should have known better gave up on making the arguments that, we have to see Palestinians as equals. If you suppress a people like that, they will rise against you. We should do it for our own good. We don't want to be this kind of society. This isn't who we are. When they gave up on making those arguments, and when they also saw that the outside was willing to go along with them, so the Abraham Accords really helped solidify this sense that we can get away with anything. They fell back on the argument that, maybe the Palestinians deserve this, but we can't get away with it because the rest of the world won't let us get away with it. And over many years, they saw that the rest of the world would let them get away with it. And so I do think that's the place to begin, that Israelis have to feel that there is a cost and consequence. They have to feel a different incentive structure. They're not going to thank anyone for it. But A, it's the right thing to do. I mean, Britain, legally, its leaders should not be complicit and therefore enabling the commissioning of war crimes. But if you want to affect the direction of travel of the debate inside Israel, then people have to be able to turn around and say, look where it's leading us. And right now they can't say that. And those who want to go even further say, look how well we're doing. So to me it means, please don't just up your level of rhetoric, okay? If the next speech by a governmental representative in Parliament uses the next word up on the diplomatic scale for criticism, then we're clearly still in the wrong place. Do not sanction the people who benefit domestically from being sanctioned. Like the British government imposed sanctions on these two ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I would even argue that recognizing Palestine is meaningless. It can be just dismissed. It has to be things that have consequences. And I'm not happy that this is where I'm going, but I think that's where we need to be. Israel should not be selling any arms. Israel's entire trade, the UK should not be selling or buying any arms from Israel. The UK's entire trade and bilateral relationship with Israel should ensure that it is not complicit in criminal actions. Given that the International Court of Justice has designated the entire occupation as illegal under international law, that essentially places the entirety of your bilateral relationship under a microscope. We should be pushing inside UEFA and other sporting bodies to say, we cannot have normal sport with an abnormal genocidal apartheid state. That's not okay. So you have to go down the practical route if you want to get their attention, while I would say constantly saying, this isn't about who you are, it's about what you do. You change your behavior and all this changes in consequence and in tandem with that.
Yeah. So it's got to have actual consequences that really do pinch.
And by the way, one other thing on this, and actually we are now better positioned to do this being out of the EU. Yeah. When the EU wants to change its trade relations with Israel, it needs either a full consensus or what's called qualified majority voting. And that is about to fail on revisiting some of the trade relations. We can do that, and we have more influence, therefore, because if we did it, it would influence other Europeans.
Right. Isn't what needs to be done is to reduce or eliminate the power of the Israeli lobby, because ultimately that's where the fact that, we as Britain will continue to support Israel because the Israeli lobby is so strong in this country, and the Israeli lobby is so strong in the US and in Germany and in France. So it's the Israeli lobby. Our government is not going to criticize Israel because the Israeli lobby is so strong. Until you eliminate that, they're going to continue to support it.
Politicians will be the last to shift their position. We should not underestimate the possibilities that the people should really do. Because what happened in the concert, for example, 2 nights ago, and what is happening in the universities, what's happening in the streets, amongst people from all kinds of a walk of society, is extremely crucial. Because I think this is much more permanent, much more original, and much more organic, that has a potential of survival. Politicians will be driven always by their own narrow, immediate interest. And that could shift once they see that the people, the masses, and the voters are shifting their position. So I would argue that we have to encourage networking amongst ourselves, and we have to encourage making our voice being heard, and we are in the age where our voice could be heard. So politicians definitely are totally, I mean, always I say that the future is much more precious than keeping it in the hand of the politicians, because they will never really think about it the way that we think.
That's fair.
Can I add? Go on.
Oh, go ahead. There's a lady in the middle there, and then there was a question back there with the white shirt, and then there was another one with somebody wearing a black top back there. But yes, lady, and then that. Oh, right there. Yeah. So we'll do that lady there, then we'll take this young girl here, and then the gentleman in the white shirt back there.
I am thinking about Egypt. Sometimes have conversations with people, and you hear pro-Sisi supporters quite superficially making the argument, well, at least we have stability because of Sisi. He's not intervening, but it's a lot more stable in Egypt. If the Brotherhood were in power, think about where we would be now. And it can surprisingly sometimes be quite difficult to have conversations with pro-Sisi supporters. But I wonder what you think, if the Brotherhood were in power, if they would have done anything differently, where we would be now.
So let me give you my theory on this, on the architecture of the region itself. I am the president of an organization called Sharq Forum. Our theory is this structure, which has been installed by the colonial powers after 1919, has reached its end. Our states are dysfunctional. We have 5 countries in the region in a state of civil war. You know, we have total corruption and total decay of the system in the rest of the countries. And the only countries who are actually functioning are the very rich ones who can spend without any calculation, but the rest are actually poor. And it is a matter of time that we are going to experience something in the Middle East much more bigger and much more radical than what we have seen in 2011. So this is very important. What we need to do is think about the new architecture. So we are calling for a new architecture in the region that is based on integration rather than separation. There are 2 trends in this region. A trend of, which is always dysfunctional, always leads to civil wars, of partition. Israel, for example, has been supporting every project of partition in the region. They are calling for partitioning Syria, before that Sudan and Yemen. Every country in the region, the Israelis' theory is partition, because Israel would love to be the biggest, the strongest, and the richest state in the region. Now, on the other side, we need a counter project of integration. Countries need to sit together and develop their common interest. Who would have thought in 1945, when the Germans and the French killed each other, and we had tens of millions of people, Who would have thought that today we are going to have something called European Union? Impossible. It would have been impossible. Our region did not go through all that. We could have easily developed another, which is actually the natural, the historical, the natural flow of history that existed for centuries in our region, that our region is interconnected. It was partitioned by the British colonialism and the French, and since then, we never knew peace in this region. So this is why we need to counterbalance the partition with something else based on integration. We need a new elite, because the current elite as well, who has been a product of this partition, are incapable of comprehending or thinking or have the courage to go forward. So this is why we are counting on new, visionary, young leaders who will eventually emerge either out of necessity or out of a new imagination to build that kind of structure, which is going to happen one day. This is why you cannot convince the current supporters of the current regimes of anything beyond their propaganda that issued to them by narrow-minded officials who lack imagination or depth or even historical understanding of our region.
Just right here, do you want to stand up to ask your question? Or you're just going to stay seated? But go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for coming today. My question is, do the majority of the people living in Israel think the same way that the Israeli government do?
Thank you for your question. I wish it was an easy answer, and it was an easy no, but it isn't. I think what you have is a situation where people think things that, if you heard it, you would say, but that doesn't make sense. You think that and that. You think what we're doing to the Palestinians is okay, it's justified, they deserve it, but you also think we should have a ceasefire. And you also think we should kick out the Palestinians, but you also know it's not going to work in the long term and more people are going to be angry. So, especially in any time, but especially in a time of conflict, people are often not logical with the things they're thinking at the same time. And so we call that cognitive dissonance. And I think there's a lot of that inside Israeli society. And therefore, there are lots of bad things that the government are doing that a lot of the public agree with. There's a lot of the public that doesn't agree with the government for other reasons. They don't like that they're not making it a priority to get out the Israelis who are still there. They're exhausted. They don't want more war anymore. And in those kinds of situations, one has to think, how can you impact the Israeli public? And that question that I answered earlier about how I think pressure from the outside, that they see in very real ways that this is not carrying their country forward, that they don't have access to sport, to all the trade they would like to have. Yeah, is it okay that there can be visa-free travel to the UK without at least having to sign a form that I didn't commit war crimes in Gaza? So there are ways we can affect them. And if I can just mention something on that Israel lobby question, which is, all I would say is that also involves a degree of hubris and overreach. And so part of it, it's not as simple as what I'm going to say now, and I'll acknowledge that up front. But part of the answer to that question is, it depends what the rest of us do in response. And the intention of lobbying groups on any issue, and certainly the intention of a powerful nuclear-armed state, is to send the signal to you, we are undefeatable. Resistance is futile. Opposition is futile. Don't even bother. It's not worth it. You'll lose anyway. And as soon as we internalize that, that approach has won. And so really, it is up to each and every one of us. And there's something really interesting that's going on in the place you'd least expect it, in the US, where just literally in the last fortnight, you have suddenly had Israel becoming controversial on the Republican MAGA right. You have some of the most important influencers in that space saying, wait a minute, I thought you were about America first. You're about Israel first? And you have had a win in the Democrat primary election in New York. And New York has lots of interesting demographics, but some of them are more interesting than others in this respect. And Zohran Mamdani won that primary election on an absolutely unwavering, principled position on this issue as well. So the takeaway has to be that it's not unbeatable.
Yeah. The position on the right, though, in the United States is a very, very dangerous path to go down in terms of anti-Semitism. It's
absolutely.
The people that are speaking up because there is an underlying current of where they want to go, and it is not a place that anyone, particularly Israel, needs to be and wants to be.
And that is why Israel is a danger to Jewish communities by what it is doing.
Exactly. There was a question back there. He's had his hand up for a while, and then I think there was a question here, and then we'll come to you, and we will come to all three of you. We have time for that. So, yep.
Hi there. Can you hear us? Yeah. I just want to ask, given the challenges of access and the politicization of reporting, what mechanisms do you believe are most effective for documenting and addressing human rights abuses in a credible way, seeing that there's so much information coming out of Gaza that is we can't get to it, and it's so hard for us to then document that. What ways can we do it that's credible?
Yeah, ethical and credible journalism. How do we get the message out there?
So, it's very clear to me. I do belong to the traditional media organizations because, I've been working for a long time in Al Jazeera. And I know my colleagues in all networks. We work together in covering the war in Iraq, and before that, the war in Afghanistan, and many other places. I have come to the following conclusion. When it comes to issues where the Western centers of power have a position, media follows that position, does not follow the standards of journalism and the so-called objectivity and moral codes and so on and so forth. All of that is cancelled. And I have seen this consistently, but now it's much more obvious in the case of Gaza. It's unbelievable. The fact that daily we have tens of people, sometimes more than 100 every day, massacred in Gaza, and they do not even reach a headline in a main news bulletin in BBC or in CNN or in any other broadcasting organization. This is very dangerous. Why? I think this is a moment of realization that the principles of journalism, which were corrupt to a large extent by centers of power, has reached its end, luckily in a moment when citizens have developed other means. So I wonder how many of us are dependent only on what we see on the traditional news channels, because all of us also are communicating with each other through other platforms. So we have plenty of information. Everything nowadays is documented. Our brave journalists in Gaza have been suffering more than, they are the true heroes of journalism. If there is something called heroes of journalism, they are the people of Gaza who have documented everything. They don't have electricity, but they are struggling just to charge their phone, so they might take a photo or shoot a video and send it to us. So everything is documented, and we are not worried about that. What we are worried about, how could we act on it? Now, a time will come that every photo and every information and every data and everyone killed in Gaza is going to get justice somehow. Because I don't think that with time people are going to forget, or we are going to forget. This is going to be an eternal issue, which I think everyone is going to pay the price for what he has done, or he has going to gain the interest or the benefit of standing against the genocide.
And I know that a certain twist to your question was, where are the reliable sources and where do we go now that the sources that we've got aren't giving us the information that we need? But we might come back to that. I want to get these two...
No, watch Al Jazeera. Simple, just
watch Al Jazeera. Okay. Fair enough. Let's get both questions asked, and then, so there's a question here, and then there was another one there. That's right.
Yeah, as a student doing politics IR, I will say it's been a busy year. It's left everybody scratching their heads in shock, to be fair, as well. But when I was doing my assignment as well, I kind of looked at, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and also the Golan Heights, and predominantly over the, geographic change of over a year. My question asks in the sense of, how can we enable international law and its mechanisms to actually benefit and take Israel into accountability, even after decades of onslaught, oppression, and general, suffering that the Palestinians have also suffered, but also countries around Israel. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so the rule of law question, and then respect for rule of law.
Hi there. Can there be peace in the Middle East while the Middle East trades in its dependence upon the US dollar? Can there be peace in the Middle East while the Middle East trades and is dependent upon the US dollar?
Yep. Can there be peace in the Middle East while the US is the US dollar is what's responsible? Why doesn't Daniel take the rule of law question and you take the money question? Or
how can we convince the world to implement the rules of law?
Yeah.
You remember there was
exactly. This is where we've been talking mostly about the granular things to do with Palestine, Israel, and the West Asia region. But if you don't really give a damn about Palestine, you are going to live the consequences of what has gone on there and what it has done to, in so many, people's faith in their own governments, people's faith in the media, but also what is happening with the abandonment to even maintain any premise of filiality to international law. And this is at a time where, even if you look at what Israel has used on the battlefield, some of the AI robotic technology, something that was exposed early on, this program called Lavender, which created a targeting where the kill ratio of innocents was so out of proportion to even what we're used to in the bad ways that AI and weaponry were already used. And look what's been going on the last few months. What has happened to the principles around humanitarian aid delivery. When you set up, when you starve a population, but you also starve and prevent the UN agencies, the established agencies internationally for delivering aid, you prevent them, you set up a new front organization which becomes its own slaughterhouse and killing field. So this is impactful in so many ways. Then you bump up against the problem that, as they used to say about the Pope, well, how many divisions does the Pope have? Well, how many police officers does the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court have? They can't implement their decisions. But once those rulings are made, that impacts the international legal climate everywhere. And so the court system in the UK does have police officers. And so when a ruling is made over a particular Israeli complicit in war crimes, or a UK leader who can now be had for violating British law by being complicit in the commissioning of war crimes. So we have to take that, and Wada and myself were at something with the International Center for Justice for Palestine yesterday, and there are some really important legal initiatives being taken by them, by Global 195, by the Hind Rajab Foundation, who have, I mean, so much of this has been Israelis self-incriminating, right? So they've posted on social media things that they have done, and you know, the more resources that are available for making sure that you catch that before someone says, you know, next time you want to travel, you might want to take that down. So make sure that it's been captured and that person can be identified. And and this happened in Brazil, they successfully spirited themselves out the country, but it's going to happen in other places. So, yeah. So one doubles down on political pressure, on documentation, and on those groups like Al-Haq in Palestine, like the groups I mentioned, who can pursue those legal cases where people can't escape justice.
My answer is there will be no peace anywhere in the world, not only in Palestine, if the current American policies continue. And I do not think that they're going to change very soon. In fact, I do think that the American foreign policy is becoming much more dangerous than any moment, and it might lead to a lot of tragedies across the world. Now, why is that happening? I understand that the Americans are panicking right now. There is a shift in the world order. There is a rise of something called China. Everyone is scared about China, and they need to counterbalance that. How? By increasing the spending of the NATO to 5%, which tells you a lot about how peaceful the future is going to be. So everyone must be armed. The future is scary. It is dangerous. The barbarians are on the doors, and we need to counter that. So we are in front of politicians who are preparing for war, not for peace. And I think they are driven by that kind of hubris and arrogance, that they will eliminate any possibility for anyone else to proceed, China or any other country, Global South and so on. So therefore, you know, I don't see a future driven by the United States of America or by the centers of power in Europe that is peaceful. I see it dangerous. I see it, we are going into a dark age rather than a brilliant one, unless we use the current moment to have a new enlightenment, a new awakening based on people this time, not based on the White House or 10 Downing Street.
I think there was a question over here. Oh, there we go.
Hello, yeah, I hear from time to time from a Palestinian friend who lives on the West Bank. Now, we see a lot of publicity about Gaza, and the situation there obviously is appalling. But the situation in the West Bank doesn't get a great deal of publicity, or not the amount it should get. I wonder if you could say a few words about the settlements and the attitude of the Israel military on the West Bank.
Wada, if you could address that, and then
So now, I am from West Bank, by the way, you know, from a city called Jenin, if you heard about Jenin. Now, what we are living under right now is the following. Every village is now having a checkpoint and a gate. And the gate closes at certain times. Most of the time it closes at 4 p.m., opens next day at 6 p.m. So any human being would like to leave that village should go between 6 a.m. or 4 p.m. And in every gate there are cameras to film who is going in and who is going out. What car is traveling from this village to that village or the other. The Israeli army is moving from village to another. Technically, they are going through homes, arresting young people, but also stealing anything they put their hands on. Gold, jewelry, currency, they just take it in front of the people. So now it is common that when the army is coming to the village, people start digging holes, putting their money or jewelry or valuables so that it will not be stolen by the army. Then you have settlers or settlements established almost in every major area, because West Bank already does not have the so-called Palestinian Authority does not have now sovereignty over almost anywhere. So you have settlers everywhere, and those settlers, whenever it suits them, they can attack any village and burn the houses and the cars and kill the animals and leave with the Israeli army protecting them. And this is daily seen. Every day you see this. And sometimes they kill and shoot whoever is going to protest against them or try to stop them. So the Palestinians in the West Bank are not protected. They are under heavy fear, oppression, and they are basically living in ghettos, besieged by the Israelis, and they cannot do anything. It is normal now that if you are moving in West Bank from place to another, you will be stopped by an Israeli soldier or officer and ask you for your phone. If he finds in your WhatsApp account or anywhere else any statement or any word or any suggestion or any exchange of news with your friends or family or anyone that could criticize the Israelis, you are going to be arrested. If your kids write something that could sympathize with Gaza or be seen that is a critical of the Israelis, they will be arrested as well. Or you will be arrested because you did not discipline them well. So the situation in West Bank is horrible. It is disastrous. Of course, Gaza is a genocide, but there is a cultural genocide as well taking place in West Bank, and there is a massive wave of terrorism by settlers and the army jointly taking place almost in every town and village in West Bank.
This is such a vital conversation, but I'm afraid we have time only for one more question, and then just very, very brief closing remarks from both of you. But the question from right front here.
Hello, thank you for taking the time to come and share your views. Probably the elephant in the room, what is referred to as the most complex or protracted conflict in the world today, Israel-Palestine, and the complicity, and we talk about genocide and the stages of genocide. I'm just wondering how you think that connects with Islamophobia, and whether if these were not Muslim children, babies, women, men, whether the international community, in particular the West, would have a different approach.
I don't think it was entirely a rhetorical question, but I'll answer the tiny gap between. Yes, for sure. And this is where it's turned on its head, and it's, oh, you're only against Israel because it's a Jewish state. No, you have to speak out. It doesn't matter the identity of the perpetrator. Any state, however it wants to self-define, conducting itself in this way should be criticized. As I've turned your question on its head, but this does feel part of a cultural war. It does feel part of something that's now defined as Judeo-Christian. against Muslim. I would say that, personally, yes, this really neatly fits something that obviously predates 9/11, but has stuck with us since. I'm not sure it would look much different if the people were any non-white people, by the way. So I don't think Palestinians have to be Muslim. I think that's a key variable. Non-white is a key variable. Let's look at how we responded in Ukraine versus how we responded on this. And also, if I'm again just going to turn it, Netanyahu may have, and the government and the Israeli system may have co-opted those symbols of the Jewish people to deploy them in this, but that's why so many of us have to speak out that it's not in our name. But I think absolutely it is easier to achieve the degree of numbness that they are going to achieve when the victims are who they are.
Let me just, say a few words about this issue. Again, history. In 1492, the Spanish authorities expelled Jews from Spain. And they could not find a place to go to, so some of them went into Portugal and other countries in Europe. And in Portugal, they faced another persecution where the kids were taken away from them, thrown on ships, and dropped in an island where everyone died. The only navy that interfered in order to protect the Jews of Europe at that time was the Islamic Navy of the Ottoman Empire during Sultan Selim I, where that navy went into the southern shores of Europe and start gathering whoever would like to escape from Europe into the Ottoman Empire. In a moment where the Jews were persecuted in Europe, the capital of the Ottoman Empire had 25% of its population Jews. And they were given preferential treatment, where they excelled to an extent that the chief rabbi of the Jews in Constantinople wrote to everyone across the world, asking them, telling them that the most beautiful place for everyone to live is in the Ottoman land. So please join us here. And this is how they were hosted in Damascus, in Jerusalem, in Constantinople, and in Istanbul, everywhere else. The trend of history tells us that we have never had an issue of so-called anti-Semitism in the Orient or in the Islamic land. It is an Occidental issue. It is a European issue. The word anti-Semitism was never known by us in the Islamic world. Never. We have never had an issue regarding that. Actually, the most important capital of Judaism in the world was Cordoba, where the philosophy and the religious discourse was written. The religious discourse of the Jews was written with the Muslims and the Christians of Cordoba. So that kind of model is the model that we would like to go back to. It's not a concept of annihilation or exclusion or destruction. If one day Palestine will be liberated, and it shall and will be liberated, that does not mean it's going to be against the Jews. In fact, here I will repeat what I heard many times from Nelson Mandela. I am not fighting to free the Africans. I am fighting to free the Africans and the whites, because it is not only the oppressed who should be freed, but also the oppressors should be freed from the tyranny of oppression and the impact on it on their souls.
Not a single person in this room wants to leave or to stop listening to you. Honestly, we could listen to you for the rest of the afternoon and come to some resolution. However, we do have to get turfed off of this stage. Please join me in thanking them, and I thank you for your attention as well. Thank you.